My baby. We're live.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a live episode of Eyes On for an extraordinary incident, Israel's attack on Iran. We don't have Jason with us today, but he will be back with us in a couple of days. So we've only got a limited amount of time. I am going to do kind of a stream of consciousness, talk about what we do know has happened, and hopefully put to rest some rather scurrilous rumors that have started flowing around in the media this morning, especially those involving speculation about U.S. involvement, which are concerning. Anyway, I mean the reports are concerning. So here's what we know: the attack took place in 3 waves, and the initial wave, unknown number of aircraft. By the way, there were about 100 aircraft involved total in the attacks. A mix of F-35s, F-15, Charlie Delta. No confirmation of F-16s, but some of those planes were also refuelers, and that's important. I'm going to get back to that. And I do want to say right off the bat, because in Twitter land, there's some rather hysterical speculation that the U.S. provide refuelers for this attack, and I would say there's absolutely no indication that happened. And in fact, everything points to the fact that the U.S. was not involved in that sense. And in any case, the Israelis didn't need U.S. help for their refueling efforts, and I'll get into that a little bit. So 3 waves. The first wave went after targets in Syria and, get this, in Iraq. All right,
Wow.
probably not with Iraqi permission, but a radar site in Babylon was hit. You know, it's kind of ironic we're dealing with biblical names, even as far afield as Iraq, and in Syria, they went after both anti-air defense sites and radar sites. Okay, that was in the first wave. Now the second wave went all the way to Iran, which, by the way, I want to remind everyone, is over 1,000 miles away, which is important when we start talking about refueling. Although the F-35, Israel has some, I think, 39 F-35s right now. That's important to know too, because some of the newspaper report, a lot of media reports say there are 100 F-35s involved, which would have been indeed extraordinary. But in any case, so the F-35 has a range of about 1,300 miles, but the Israelis have been saying publicly that they can launch an attack on Iran without refueling their F-35s. Neither here nor there. They had the ability to do so, and undoubtedly all F-35s were involved. But there are also drones too. Now, the second wave. This is the first one that into Iran. The second wave, just like we predicted here on this channel, went after anti-air defense systems, specifically S-35 and S-400. The Israelis are reporting that they have removed from the play, from the chessboard, every single S-300 and S-400 that the Iranians had, and the Iranians just had a plus up from Russia on that S-400.
Oh, wow.
That is significant, right? So, regardless of subsequent outcomes, regardless of what happens after this, the fact that Israel specifically denuded Iran's ability to defend itself, not just for this particular raid, but for some time until Russia can backfill these systems, that is significant. All right, sends a message. And it means, and it's quite smart. It means that Iran's going to be quite cautious about how it responds. Now, the third wave went after about 20 sites, okay? And these range from, there were some sites around Tehran. There was a Revolutionary Guards barracks. And I do want to say this, okay? The Israelis sent a warning to Iran because they wanted to minimize to casualties. And they basically said, they didn't list the targets, but they said, we're going after these sorts of targets. And they emphasized the fact we are going to be hitting Revolutionary Guards barracks, and there was one in particular they hit outside Tehran. But they did warn the Iranians. That's why, there are only 2 people killed. Unfortunate for those two, but it could have been far worse. But they also went after missile. They went after a site that manufactures industrial components for these missiles and drones. It's called the Asham Industrial Park. So you'll look on Twitter, you'll see these great explosions taking place in this industrial park. Well, they are going after factories that are providing components. I think it's specifically for drones. Now, in media reports, it's saying that they destroyed the factories that create, the Shahed drones that have been exported to Russia. That's neither here nor there, because Russia's actually building its own Shahed drones in Russia. But you get the idea. They're going after that capability to manufacture more drones and missiles. Now, the U.S., obviously concerned about escalation, has jumped in and said, hey, the attack was proportionate. Well, the U.S. was heavily involved in shaping this attack to ensure that it was proportionate. And there's a lot of stuff in the news about all the forces that the U.S. has rushed to the area. Well, yes, there were plus up certainly on the aviation side, but I think that's more of a proportionate move. And I want to emphasize here that the United States was not involved in the strike. Okay, and you can say, how do you know, Andy? Just call it informed speculation. I don't know. All right, but it's important, I think, to get that out here. Okay, so let's go back to what exactly. We'll talk about the ramifications, but let's talk about kind of a little bit more about the breakdown of the strike. So, the logistics challenges have been discussed quite a bit in the media, and there's a lot of uninformed speculation. The Israelis actually practiced this in broad daylight back in August. Okay, I don't know, it wasn't really picked up in the papers, but you could see this from Israel. I mean, they launched this massive, I don't know if it was 100 aircraft, but it was a massive phalanx of aircraft that took off from various bases in Israel and swung out over the Mediterranean. And again, broad daylight. I think you can find photographs, and they even practice refueling using. By the way, the Israelis have some very capable refueling capability, and it's not, when people talk about the limitations on Israeli strikes, range is everything. The Israelis have been working this problem the last decade, and they've got, aside from our own K-46, the Pegasus refuelers, they have their own, which is a kind of a refurbished 707. And in fact, they've proven using they use the way they operate the boom at night using it's a remote visual system. I wish we had Alex Hollings on here, but here's what I'm saying: the Israelis arguably are as capable, probably more capable than the United States when it comes to refueling, because we have all these problems with the Pegasus that the Israelis seem to have ironed out. They've been practicing this for a long time. So they did not need U.S. help. That's what I'm trying to say. They really didn't. And that's an important point too, because when we talk about Israeli attacks on nuclear facilities, we used to say that the Israelis couldn't do it because they didn't have sufficient penetrating ordnance or in sufficient quantity to go after the sites. Well, that may or may not be true, but they certainly do have deep penetrating bombs. And the second thing we say is they need U.S. help for refueling. That is no longer true. Okay. As I mentioned, they reported right off the bat that they destroyed specifically, all the radars for the S-400 and S-300. I should have been more specific, not the interceptors. That would have been an impossible task, but the radars are all important and they're harder to replace. So everything now kind of rests on the response, right? And all indications are, the Iranians are kind of playing this down. They're saying that they didn't suffer any significant damage. They did release a reporting of 2 military casualties, 2 Revolutionary Guard members who were killed. 2 of the sites that the Israelis went after were in the western part of the country, and that is significant because they're looking, again, the Israelis are looking at Iran's ability to react, and so by taking out missile systems closest to and radars closest to Israel, that was kind of their priority targets, and that's why you see all these attacks in the west part of the country in areas that seem to be quite remote. They used and they also I'm trying to remember the name of the base. The Parchin military base was hit almost entirely by drones. Okay, there's no indication yet of types of drones, but it's kind of interesting that these drones, we knew they had the range because obviously they had the range, but the point is drone attacks are normally at that range quite ineffective because, as we saw back in April, you can see them coming and you can track them. But by masking this within a strike package, the Israelis were able to carry this off without drones being intercepted. That takes some planning, all right, on timing and everything else. So again, this was meticulously planned. What do we watch for now? Well, by all accounts, life back in Tehran is back to normal. It's late Sunday afternoon there. In Twitter feeds, you can see people just strolling around. There's no sign of damage within Tehran itself. And I think, everyone's waiting to see the next statement from Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, because that's going to be critical. And I don't know if he's spoken yet. If not, he's going to speak pretty soon. And if he claims that Israel's trying to force a war with a war between Iran and the U.S. or between Iran and Israel, then that's going to be a strong kind of de-escalatory indicator. Okay, but if he focuses on, this is what the Khomeini watchers say, if he focuses on expressing readiness for war and committing to retaliation, well, then now we need to worry. I would say absolutely it's going to be the former. Okay, he's going to come out and vilify Israel, of course, and the United States for backing it up. And then he'll talk about the dangers of a regional war and how Iran has been anxious to avoid that. And I think those are, I'm putting words in his mouth, wishful thinking. But those are kind of the de-escalatory themes that we're expecting to hear. That's all I have. Yeah, I'm trying to think about what questions you had, the.
We got a good question actually in the chat that I was thinking about too, from Brian Thomas. Andy, what's the downside of going after their nuclear sites? Won't hurt the economy the way oil strikes would, or is there a question if they can actually reach those targets that far underground? Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, D. That last part, it's a question of whether they can. And again, this is just speculation, but we know, like the good guys know, that since Gaza kicked off, the Iranians have been, actually since before then, in the last 18 months or so, the Iranians have been squirreling away centrifuges in an area of Natanz that is obviously we believe to be a weapons enrichment site, but it's much deeper than previous sites. I don't know more than that. So what that, but discovering that means that all the previous calculations, if there were such calculations about striking those sites, are now up in the air. So we don't, that's the real risk. It's not, oh, we're worried that Iran will do something if we do destroy its nuclear capability. I think we're just questioning whether we, and I say we collectively, have the ability to do that. And if we don't, then certainly the Israelis don't. But aside from the nuclear threat, the Israelis were considerably worried about the ballistic missiles. So the Iranians have like 9 types of ballistic missile that can now range Israel. And I won't go into, I can't even remember all the names.
Yeah, no, you're not Alex
But they,
Hollings. Don't do it to yourself.
yeah, but I mean, but they, these missiles range everything from, um, uh, to 2,500 kilometers, which is about 1,500 miles, all right, down to around 900. So they can, the longer range ones can certainly reach Israel, and they're moving at a hellacious pace. I think it's the Seji flies at like 17,000 kilometers, 10,000 miles
Wow.
an hour, right? So it's not, so a mass attack by ballistic missiles like that would be very hard to defend against. And then you've got the whole Shahab series of ballistic missiles too. So a significant capability. I think that's what the Israelis were worried about. And that's why see them hitting these sites in the western part of the country.
So you really
Makes
think they
sense.
decimated their entire, like most of their SAM sites, like their S-300 and
I
S-400
no,
SAMs?
the radars.
Oh, the
Yeah,
radars. I'm sorry.
I think it's a legitimate claim when they say they have blinded the Iranians by taking out, for all intents and purposes, all their S-300, S-400 radar.
Wow.
And again, the Israelis have been planning this for a long time. So
I remember you did mention a few weeks back, like the Israelis have like really pivoted their military into like their air force and like being able to carry out
yeah,
longer range attacks.
when you talk about the Israeli Air Force strike capability, it is all very much adversary based, and there's one adversary it's based on primarily, and that is going after Iran. Um, Not just the nuclear sites, but that's the main concern. But also these missiles that I've been talking about. The problem is that for the last few years, Iran's been developing underground missile depots with both transport and firing systems. And back in 2020, I can't remember the type of missile, but they did fire their first ballistic missile from a subterranean site, and that is a concern.
One thing I have a question about, because like in most of the reporting where it said like Israel communicated to Iran Friday ahead of the strike, like just before, warning Iran not to respond. Like that was like really in every single like reporting was warning Iran not to respond. Was it that, or was it like we're warning you that we're coming and this is a proportional thing? We're not gonna like completely wreck you.
Yeah, it's all part of the messaging, D. I
Yeah.
think, I mean, and remember when I make these comments, they're agnostic. I'm a bit agnostic about sympathies, but I'm just saying that it was very clever messaging. So, number one was messaging, hey, here it comes. This is the strike, both for global audience and the Iranians. We're not going crazy, so you better not go crazy in return, basically was
Yeah.
the message. And then very unusual to reach out to Iran itself and say we're going after these types of things. And that was with one purpose, and that was to reduce casualties, because there is an unspoken agreement that is part of this, retaliation back and forth, right?
Right.
Not to kill a lot of people. I don't want to be a cynic, but it's fine to kill a lot of people in Lebanon or Gaza, but not if they are part of a sovereign country that might strike back. Is kind of the theory behind it.
Do we
Uh,
see
mm,
more proxy stuff popping off rather than like another uh ballistic missile or drone attack on Israel?
well, I would say so, but Hezbollah, Hezbollah, which is Iran's main method of striking back, Hezbollah is on the ropes. Look, I'm not being Pollyannish about this. I just, I think we're at a timeout stage here. I think, as we've talked about Hezbollah. No one on the Hezbollah Iranian sides wants Hezbollah to respond now. They want Hezbollah to recover, and that's going to take a while. And the Iranians are not in a position domestically or internationally to strike back. It'll gain them nothing internationally. It'll just vilify them further and lay them open to further attack, especially now they've lost their anti-defense systems. But domestically, they're dealing with a lot of, some unrest. All right. We're not talking about kind of a, whatever it was, a green or orange revolution as it was back in 2008.
Mm.
Green, yeah, necessarily, but that's everyone's concern. They've got a new president. I'm talking about Iran. He's a little more moderate for what it's worth, and that's supposed to reflect domestic sentiment. And domestic sentiment, is strongly militating to be part of the world again, right? As strongly as it possibly can in a non-democratic country like Iran. But people are getting pissed off with all this foreign adventuring. Their economy has gone down the toilet. Price of bread is sky high. People are feeling the pinch. They have been for years, and they don't like reading about Iran gallivanting around, jousting with Israel or anyone else when they're having trouble putting food on the table. And
Yeah.
that sentiment, I think, is influencing decisions within the Iranian regime.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense for them to be more pragmatic, right? Because it doesn't seem like even if they were to have an all-out, you can't even have an all-out war, but an all-out exchange militarily with Israel, it's not really gonna work out great for them.
Yeah, it's a lose-lose for them right now.
Yeah.
And they don't. I mean, the Iranians have a new friend. Remember that, Russia. So they're not in quite as it might. In other words, they have the ability to recover from this because Russia, as I've mentioned, will resupply them with certainly with the air defense systems, and who knows, maybe even with ballistic missile technology. Just the same way we're worried about Russia providing North Korea with some of this technology. Certainly, Russia's not bound by any international ethical norms to prevent it from doing so. But
That
yeah, I
also
do.
speaks to that
Yeah,
broader topic of like you see this new axis kind of form. I hate that kind of like Atlantic Council word, but that new like axis of like countries, whether it's Russia, DPRK, Iran, China. I feel like China is probably providing some stuff more on the low end, like covertly rather than straight up overtly. Um,
yeah. I'm just with China though. I mean, there's yes, certainly China and Iran recently signed a deal, and I'm just trying to think of specific technology that may be exchanging hands there. I think more. I think that deal was more important economically, perhaps, to Iran than militarily. Of course, very much so more economically as a market for oil. But the Russian agreement is very important because remember, since 1979, Iran has not been able to, or has a limited ability to upgrade its military equipment. In 1979, in the revolution, the entire Iranian military was outfitted with U.S. gear. And when I was in Iran just 8 years later, that was very visible. When they were going to war with Iraq, in the staging areas, you saw M113s, and yeah, and soldiers carrying U.S. weapons back then. It was like the original M16A1. It was very uh, it looked discordant. It looked strange, but
yeah,
that's even now. I mean, that's a long time ago. So they've kind of shift since then to Soviet packed weapons, and that's where Russia, former Soviet packed weapons, and that's where Russia comes in and is a huge asset.
sure. Yeah, I've seen the memes like the lone F-14 that the Iranians still have, which I can't
Yeah,
believe they still have flying. It's pretty crazy.
yeah. Let's hope the Russians don't, start providing them with frog foots.
Yeah.
What's that? Frog feet.
Frogfoot, right? The SU-25.
Yeah. Su-25 and 29, which had been kind of the not just the workhorse, but the most capable fighters that we've seen in the Ukrainian conflict. Again, we need to get Alex Hollings on here because
Yeah,
I'm
I
on
mean,
the nice when I'm talking about remote boom refueling and all this
Alex
other
knows the
shit.
variants of every single one. Like
Yeah.
he's
Uh, and I want to hear, it's I find this interesting, but I'm not even going to step under this technical precipice. How, the Israelis have played around with the F-35, with its, obviously with its stealth capability, but also its refueling capability to ensure that they can conduct a raid, an attack that is both stealthy and self-refuel, using that platform. But again, the Israelis only have, hard to say how many are operational, but I think we sold them 50, but I think only 39 have been delivered. So again, all this talk about 100 F-35s is absolute trash.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's get Alex back on. This is a good trailer for
Well, I
him.
mean, there was a reason why they did the three waves, right? The first wave is to suppress the air defenses, and the other,
Well, yeah.
right?
Well, interesting. The first wave was to remove any possibility of early warning, right? So we don't know exactly what track the aircraft took, but it's a safe guess that they went over Iraq and Syria, right? Because that's where the first wave went to remove those, the radar sites and the air defense sites. It was mostly radar sites, but as I said, I think there were also air defense sites that they removed in Syria in that first wave. And then, as we predicted on the show, the second wave was intended to totally denude the Iranians of their S-300, S-400 capability.
That's pretty scary. Pretty impressive that they're able to do that. I mean, because if you're even just like a layman who's semi interested in like air defense and like air forces, the S-300 and S-400 have been like the be all end all of like the surface to air missiles.
Yeah, I mean, the S-300, remember, which is an outdated, I mean, it's like a 30-year-old system, was the workhorse in Ukraine and has done, did incredible work. Um, but the key vulnerability is the radar. You can move the interceptors around and disguise them and everything, but the radar gives off its signature, and that's, you can't avoid doing that in those systems, and that is what undoubtedly the Israelis went after, anti-radiation missiles. So you either shut down the capability, but if you open it, then you open up a window of vulnerability.
Yeah. So what do you think does happen next with Iran? How do they respond?
I think we're going to see. I don't think anything's going to happen. I think we're going to see some rhetoric, and then things are going to die down. I think, although the Israelis said this is the end of the first phase of the strike, what I'm being told is that there is, subsequent planned phases are, they are contingent upon the Iranians responding to this one. So if we just see rhetoric in return, that I would say that is it, which is good news for all. There's another thing, actually, kind of interesting when we bring Alex back on is the command and control of an operation like this. And it gets back to obviously you need a really good aerial command and control. You can imagine doing this. That's not easy, and it can't be done from the ground. And that is the Israelis, again, using these converted 707s. So I forget the term. So one of our listeners will remember, but they're not just refuelers, very capable refuelers, but they're also command and control aircraft. And that is another, the fact that the Israelis can command and control an operation this size involving multiple types of aircraft, multiple targets, drones, says a lot for their capability. They, of course, their Air Force, ever since its formation back in 1948, when it was a handful of World War II veterans flying, believe it or not, checkmate Bf-109 Messerschmitts. The Air Force has always been kind of a main effort for Israel. The best people and the most money, highest technology, and they focused very, very much on this capability. This was, in a sense, a superb dress rehearsal for them if they do go after Iran's nuclear capability.
Yeah. So a bit more detail on the message that Israel sent to Iran yesterday before the attack. This is from Barack Ravid, the Axios reporter, who's really got a good thumb on the pulse of what goes on. A senior official from another country that was asked by Israel to convey identical messages to Iran called me today and confirmed the details in the article. Israel sent the messages to Iran in the days and even hours before the attack. One message was, "We will attack military targets and not nuclear or energy sites." Another message was, "Do not respond. If you react, we'll hit you harder."
Yeah. Yeah. And, as I said, there was both explicit and implicit messaging.
Yeah.
The implicit messaging is you are now very vulnerable. And the other implicit messaging, taking out those early warning signs, was simply one of freedom of maneuver. We can do this anytime.
Yeah.
You don't have to ask permission to cross people's terrain, because Israel didn't get permission from anyone to fly over their
Right.
airspace, fly through their airspace, right? I mean, they were denied entry by all. Jordan, Jordan most notably and recently. So, to avoid offending kind of the forefront Arab powers, Jordan, UAE, Saudi Arabia, it's very unlikely that the Israelis would ever go near any of those countries when they conduct their overflight. Although I will say, when they went after Yemen, when they released video of refueling, you could see a friendly Arab country coastline in the background. I won't mention that country, and not to say. I mean, obviously that country didn't allow them to do it. Maybe they did. I don't know.
Right.
But normally Israel does not count on being allowed overflight of Arab nations when they do something like this.
Yeah, I think that's understandable, or at least like putting it out there,
Yeah.
trying to keep that as quiet as possible.
So, any other questions, Steve? I know it's
Um,
short and sharp, but we are. This is breaking news, but I think
yeah,
we've covered this as accurately as anyone could at this. He says rather pompously, as accurately as is possible at this stage.
yeah. So a bit more from Barack Ravid. As part of the Israeli retaliatory action against Iran, uh, planetary mixers, 12 planetary mixers that are critical components of the Iran's ballistic missile program were attacked, according to three Israeli sources. Planetary mixers are used to produce solid fuel for long-range ballistic missiles, and their destruction severely impairs Iran's ability to replenish the missile stockpile. So they hit some, yeah, they went for it. It's very specific.
Yeah, yeah. And that was the Al Sham industrial facility, the factory there. So again, some very comprehensive planning here.
Yeah.
Any questions from listeners before we sign off?
Let's see if there's any crazy. You guys, we'll give you guys a few minutes. Like if you want to throw out a question in the chat, I'll ask it if it's not ridiculous.
Children are back in school in Tehran. As I said, back in school it's a Sunday. It's an Islamic country. That's okay.
Do they go to school on Sundays in Islamic countries?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
they get Friday and Saturday off. What do you expect? A 3-day weekend?
Fair point. Yeah, why not?
I know in Brooklyn it's like a 2-day week at school, but that's for other reasons.
Yeah, that's like for truants like me. I mean, guys, if you have any other questions, shoot them in the chat right now. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Oh,
Also,
please.
a link will be in the description for the new Eyes On YouTube channel. Be sure to hit that because after a few of these episodes, we're going to start posting exclusively there. So if you don't want to miss an episode, subscribe to the Eyes On YouTube channel. Of course, Andy's book, When the Tempest Gathers, available everywhere. The link will be in the description after the show ends. Uh, Andy's got a Substack too. He writes some cool stuff on there. Um,
All right.
Hold on one second, Andy. All right, yeah, we're good. Thank you guys. Please, patreon.com/the team house. That helps everybody. Every single link will be in the description and in the show notes if you're listening. Again, we have to say it again. Subscribe to the new Eyes On YouTube channel. You will never
Yeah,
miss an episode if you do.
the Team House has. I mean, we're catching up on the Team House. The Team House has only, 145,000 subscribers,
Yeah,
and I think we're at what, 1,000 now.
almost just before. I
Yeah.
think hopefully after this live stream,
After
it'll
this,
get.
yes,
Yeah.
please let's launch this up there.
All right, guys. We appreciate it. We'll see you again soon, actually, because we will be.
We'll be
Uh,
back to talk Ukraine in a couple of days.
hold on one second. Let me make sure I can get out of this before we start talking too much smack.